Hi, today we're going to talk about corporate governance, which is chapter 10 in the current book that we're in. So, what is corporate governance? What we're really talking about is how do owners and managers, high-level managers, kind of manage the relationships among various stakeholders in the organization. And the purpose of governance mechanisms is to prevent really severe problems that can occur because the separation of ownership and control in large firms by positively influencing how managers behave and how they make decisions. And the ability of how we govern those mechanisms to direct our top leaders' actions towards the objectives of shareholders is really dependent on how we combine the use of different mechanisms to control that. So corporate governance first is the set of these mechanisms. Think of that as rules, policies, etc., used to manage that relationship and direct the performance. So at its core, we're really concerned with identifying ways to ensure that strategic decisions are made effectively in the best interest of the organization and stakeholders and shareholders. Corporate governance has been really emphasized in more recent years because there's a huge impact on especially large organizations. And we're really focusing on larger organizations here. We'll have a short conversation around entrepreneurs and small family-owned businesses, for example, that generally plays out differently. So we have three internal mechanisms that we use today in organizations in order to kind of make sure we're making decisions that are in alignment. The market for those influencing managers' decisions and the outcomes resulting from them. And that is ownership concentration, which refers to the types of shareholders and their different incentives to monitor the managers of the organization, the board of directors, and then we'll talk about executive compensation and how that impacts corporate governance. So, what factors account for considerable amount of attention that we have today for towards corporate governance? And why is it necessary to control managers' decisions? So think about the idea that how firms monitor and control our top level executives' decisions and their actions, that clearly affects the implementations of strategies throughout the organization. Effective governance that aligns managers' decisions with shareholders' interests should provide competitive advantage and keep us all on the same page. Think about it that way. So it's important to separate ownership and managerial control so that we have a checks and balance within the organization. So, for example, it's easy. Let's think about Henry Ford. He was both involved in ownership of the Ford Motor Company. He owned it and he operated it in those early days. So, today, it's less likely that we would see a complex corporation owned and operated by one person without some managerial control that kind of breaks up the power and provides checks and balances in a more workable model. Shareholders make investments by purchasing stocks, which entitle them to a share of the firm's income, right? Or profits that remains after all the expenses are paid. So the right to share in that residual income means that shareholders also must accept the risk that we might not have profits today, and that will remain if the firm's expenses exceed its income, obviously. Shareholders can manage investment risk by investing in diversified portfolio of firms. In small firms, we see managers and owners are often the same person, and so there's lack of separation of ownership and control. As that family-controlled firm grows, however, the owners generally do not have enough capital or managerial skills to grow the business, and so they have to seek other sources of capital and skills to support the expansion of that organization. So modern corporations are characterized by an agency relationship between owners and managers, although the efficient separation of ownership and control enables specialization by owners and managers. It also results in some potential costs and risks for owners by creating this agency relationship. And what that refers to is that one party delegates decisions to another party. So think of the party that's delegating decisions as the principal, and the person receiving the responsibility for those decisions and responsibility for that decision making is called the agent. And the agent gets paid, is compensated for their work as a decision-making specialist who performs a service. So that relationship can be broader than just managers and owners. We can include consultants, anyone in our supply chain. We can from suppliers or clients, and they can be very effective. An agency relationship means that one party delegates the decision-making responsibility to a second party for compensation, which we just talked about. This figure illustrates how a separation of ownership and control results in an agency, and how it's just helpful to see how we divide up the responsibility for risk and decision-making. The potential for conflicts of interest between owners and managers is created when we delegate the responsibilities of decision-making to those managers. So managers now take actions that are not in the best interest, possibly, of owners by selecting strategic alternatives that serve the managerial's interests rather than the shareholder or owner's interests. We can see that happen when we have managerial compensation it's created in a way that is self-serving. And so if a marketing manager, for example, is compensated by the effectiveness of a marketing campaign to provide leads to sales or the sales organization, I can create a campaign that creates lots of leads, but they may not be effective. So if I'm compensated by those leads generated and not by the actual conversion of those leads into sales, thus income, which benefits the sales arm and it benefits shareholders across the board and stakeholders, well, certainly shareholders, then that would be an example of where I need some more governance and mechanisms in place, because the managerial opportunism that's available is really self-fulfilling, and we can do that without realizing it. So before observing the results of decisions, we have to know which agents will behave opportunistically and which ones will not, because a manager's reputation is an imperfect guide to future behaviors. So as a result, principals establish governance and control mechanisms because the opportunity for those behaviors and conflict of interest exists. So what are we talking about? I'm going to give you a recent example of Kansas City. The Chiefs and Royals are baseball and football teams. The owners have expressed desire to change the relationship with the county where they're housed, and are supported by tax funding. Those owners, in deciding that they wanted to persuade constituents in order to change this taxing model, hired an outside agency, and that agency was going to market and really do the marketing for those teams to convince taxpayers to vote positively on an upcoming tax. But what happened in that process was that agency was both a pollster and a marketing firm. Basically, they don't call it that in kind of political consulting, but that's what they were. So when you are the pollster and you're going to go poll to demonstrate to the client or the owners how the constituents believe today and how you can move them to be motivated by your campaign. When the pollster and the marketing arm are the one and the same, there's a self-serving interest implicitly designed in that mechanism and needs to be considered. And it did not work out well for the organization. So agency costs refer to what it costs us to have that relationship. And that's more than just the contract. There can be incentives, monitoring costs, enforcement costs. Are they doing what we asked? Are we getting the results that we desired, et cetera? And we need to watch those through monitoring relationships.